The storm did not arrive quietly. Rain tore across the southern coast of England, driven sideways by a violent wind. Waves slammed into the cliffs of Lyme Regis, exploding into white spray that vanished into the dark air. Thunder rolled so close it felt as if the sky itself were cracking open. Inside a small house near the shore, a baby girl cried for the first time. Her name was Mary Anning. She was born in 1799 into a world that offered little mercy to the poor and even less to girls. Lyme Regis was beautiful, but unforgiving. The sea fed the town, yet it also destroyed it. Ships were lost, fishermen drowned, and the cliffs, high, layered, and unstable, shed stone after every storm, reshaping the coastline without warning. Mary's family lived close to the edge of survival. Her father, Richard Anning, worked as a carpenter, crafting furniture for those who could afford it. When work was scarce, he turned toward the cliffs. After storms, the fallen rock revealed strange shapes, coiled shells, sharp teeth, bones hardened into stone. Visitors paid small sums for these curiosities, and for the Anning family, those coins meant food and rent. Mary followed her father from the time she could walk. While other children played in the streets, she walked the shoreline, eyes fixed on the ground. Richard taught her how to spot the faint curve of a fossil hidden in shale, how to tap gently so the stone would open instead of shatter, how to watch the tides and retreat before the sea reclaimed the beach. The cliffs were dangerous places. After heavy rain, entire sections could collapse without warning, burying anyone beneath them. But danger was part of daily life in Lyme Regis, and Mary learned early that careful attention was the difference between life and death. Her childhood was shaped by loss. Of the 10 children born to the Anning family, only 2 lived beyond infancy. Disease moved swiftly through poor homes, and medicine offered little defense. Mary survived, quiet, serious, and observant beyond her years. A story followed her through the town. As a baby, she had been held by a woman standing beneath a tree when lightning struck, killing 3 people instantly. Mary lived. Some called it luck. Others whispered it was a sign. Mary learned to read and write at a small dissenters' school. Her family did not belong to the Church of England, and that alone marked them as outsiders. Religion, class, and poverty formed invisible barriers around her life, limiting opportunity before she could even imagine it. When Mary was 11, those barriers tightened. Her father's health failed after years of cold, damp work along the coast. A fall from the cliffs weakened him further. Tuberculosis followed, and soon Richard Anning was dead. Death arrived almost immediately after his burial. There was no safety net, no assistance, and no choice. Fossil hunting was no longer a curiosity. It became survival. Mary took her father's place on the cliffs. She carried heavy tools, faced cutting winds, and worked beneath towering walls of stone that could collapse at any moment. Often she worked alone, scanning the ground for anything the storms had exposed. One wrong step could send her sliding toward the sea. One sudden landslide could erase her entirely. Few people understood how dangerous this work truly was. The cliffs were made of layered rock that turned slick and unstable when wet. After storms, fossil hunters raced against time, knowing the sea would soon wash away whatever had been revealed. Mary learned to move quickly, to strike carefully, and to trust her instincts. Then, during one bitter winter, the cliffs surrendered something extraordinary. Mary's brother Joseph noticed it first, a skull locked deep within the rock, long and narrow, lined with sharp teeth. It resembled a crocodile, but something was wrong. It was too large. Too strange. Mary took over the excavation, carefully chipping away stone day after day. Slowly, a body emerged. Vertebrae followed by ribs, then paddle-shaped limbs. It was a creature no one could explain. People gathered to see it. Some whispered of dragons. Others spoke of beasts drowned in a great flood. Science had no name for it yet, and many refused to believe such a creature could have existed at all. The fossil was sold, bringing the Anning family brief relief from poverty. The discovery traveled far beyond Lyme Regis, into the hands of collectors and scholars. Mary's name rarely traveled with it. Still, she returned to the cliffs. Because the stone held more secrets. And the dangers she faced were only beginning to reveal the true cost of uncovering the past. One moment it stood silent and solid, towering above the narrow beach. The next, it collapsed with a sound like thunder, stone tearing away from stone, crashing down in a violent roar that shook the ground. Dust filled the air. Rock shattered. The sea swallowed what remained. Mary Anning stood frozen, heart pounding, staring at the place where life had existed just seconds before. This was the reality of the cliffs of Lyme Regis. They did not care who you were. They gave nothing without taking something in return. Imagine standing at the base of those cliffs. Above you, layers of rock stack like pages in a book older than humanity. Beneath your feet, loose shale shifts with every step. The tide is creeping in. The wind cuts through your coat. Somewhere in that stone, something ancient waits to be uncovered. And somewhere else, death waits just as patiently. This was Mary Anning's workplace. After her father's death, the cliffs became both her livelihood and her greatest threat. Each storm reshaped the coastline, tearing open layers of earth that had been sealed for millions of years. Fossils appeared where none had been before: bones, shells, creatures frozen in time. But storms also loosened the cliffs themselves. Rockfalls were common. Landslides deadly. People died here. Mary knew their names. Fossil hunting was not a respectable profession. It was dirty, dangerous work done by the poor. Gentlemen collectors might admire the specimens, but they rarely respected the people who found them. For a young woman poor, uneducated by formal standards, and openly dissenting in religion, the barriers were enormous. Mary felt them every day. She sold fossils to survive, negotiating with wealthy visitors who often assumed she knew little of what she held in her hands. They were wrong. Mary understood the cliffs better than anyone. She knew which layers held ammonites, where vertebrae might appear, how to extract delicate bones without destroying them. Her hands were skilled. Her mind was sharp. But the world saw only her class. Few people know how isolated Mary's life truly was. Lyme Regis sat far from London's scientific circles. News traveled slowly. Recognition traveled even slower. Scholars came to visit her, asked questions, took notes, and left. Their names appeared in journals. Hers did not. Still, Mary worked. Day after day. Storm after storm. She learned to read the signs, the way fresh cracks appeared after heavy rain, the subtle changes in color that hinted at something buried beneath. She worked quickly, knowing the sea would erase her discoveries if she waited too long. Sometimes she found nothing. Sometimes she found fragments. And sometimes, the cliffs revealed wonders. Among her most remarkable finds were creatures stranger than the ichthyosaur. Long-necked skeletons with small heads and powerful bodies. Animals that seemed built for oceans that no longer existed. These fossils confused even experienced scientists. They did not resemble anything alive. Mary did not yet know the word plesiosaur. But she knew it was important. And she knew it was dangerous to uncover. The cliffs never gave up their secrets easily. Danger came not only from falling stone, but from the slow pressure of poverty. Money was always uncertain. A good find could mean comfort for a season. A bad one meant hunger. Mary's mother depended on her income. Every trip to the cliffs carried weight not just of rock, but of responsibility. Mary could not afford fear. But fear followed her anyway. She had seen what the cliffs could do. She had watched landslides bury paths she had walked hours earlier. She had heard stories of fossil hunters crushed beneath rock, bodies never recovered. Each time she stood beneath the towering walls, she accepted that she might not return. And still, she went back. Then came the day the cliffs took something from her. During one excavation, Mary narrowly escaped a massive rockfall. Stone thundered down where she had been standing moments before. Dust filled the air. When it settled, her dog, her constant companion on the cliffs, was gone. Buried. Killed instantly. Mary survived. The cliffs had spared her life, but made their message clear. Nothing here was free. Despite the danger, her reputation quietly grew. Collectors sought her out. Museums purchased her finds. Scholars began to rely on her judgment, even if they rarely admitted it publicly. Mary could identify fossils others misclassified. She corrected mistakes. She saw connections. She was building knowledge from the ground up. Yet she remained on the margins. As a woman, she could not join scientific societies. As a dissenter, she stood outside the established order. As a working-class fossil hunter, she was seen as useful but not equal. Her discoveries shook the foundations of accepted belief. But her voice was rarely heard. The cliffs continued to shape her life. They provided food and shelter. They took friends and animals. They revealed ancient worlds. And they demanded constant risk. Mary Anning walked a narrow line between survival and annihilation, between obscurity and greatness. Every fossil she uncovered carried not just scientific value, but the weight of her own survival. The land was creating a legend. And testing it. Because deep within those cliffs lay a discovery so complete, so unsettling, that it would force the scientific world to look directly at the woman they had long overlooked. And when that moment came, the silence surrounding Mary Anning would no longer hold. The storm had passed, but the cliffs were still bleeding. Imagine standing at the base of a towering wall of stone, slick with rain, the smell of salt and rot heavy in the air. Above you, the cliffs of Lyme Regis groan and shift, as if alive. Every step is a gamble. One wrong sound, one sudden crack, and the earth itself can come crashing down. This is where Mary Anning walked. Not in safety. Not with permission. But with hunger, curiosity, and the quiet courage of someone who knows that whatever waits inside the rock might change everything or kill her. After storms, the cliffs revealed their secrets. Rain loosened the ancient layers, tearing open the earth like a wound. And from these wounds, strange shapes emerged. Curved bones. Teeth like daggers. Eyes turned to stone. The locals had names for them. Curiosities. Crocodiles. Freaks of nature. Mary knew better. She had grown up among these cliffs, learning their moods, their dangers, their patterns. Her father had taught her where to look and when to run. After his death, those lessons became survival. Fossils were no longer wonders, they were bread, rent, and the thin line between her family and the workhouse. One winter morning, Mary noticed something unusual protruding from the cliff face. A dark curve. Smooth. Too deliberate to be chance. She began to dig. Hours passed. The cold crept into her bones. Her fingers bled. And slowly, impossibly, a skull emerged, long and narrow, filled with teeth sharp as spears. It did not resemble anything living. This was no fish. No crocodile. No known creature of God's creation. When the full skeleton was uncovered, it stunned everyone who saw it. A massive body. Paddle-like limbs. A spine built for the sea. An animal that looked like a dragon designed by the ocean itself. The ichthyosaur. Though the name would come later, the shock was immediate. This creature was ancient. Vastly ancient. And it had no place in the world people thought they understood. Few people realize how dangerous this discovery truly was, not physically, but spiritually. At the time, most believed the earth was only a few thousand years old. That God had created all animals in one divine moment. That extinction was impossible. God would not erase his own work. Yet here lay proof of a world that no longer existed. A sea dragon pulled from the earth. Mary did not have the language to explain what she had found. She did not write papers or give lectures. She sold the fossil, because she had to. But her discovery began to circulate through scientific circles like a tremor. Gentlemen scholars traveled to Lyme Regis to see it for themselves. They stood in their fine coats, staring at the skeleton arranged on wooden boards, whispering theories. Some argued it was a modern animal distorted by the flood of Noah. Others claimed it was a trick of nature, assembled from different bones. Very few spoke Mary's name. She was a young woman. Poor. uneducated by their standards. A dissenter in a deeply Anglican society. She belonged to the wrong class, the wrong gender, the wrong church. So they took the fossil and left her behind. But Mary kept working. Each storm brought new danger and new opportunity. The cliffs were unstable. Entire sections collapsed without warning. People died there. Fossil hunters were crushed, buried, swept into the sea. Mary witnessed these deaths. She felt the ground shake. She heard the thunder of falling stone. And still, she returned. Because the earth was speaking, and she was one of the few who listened. Soon, she uncovered another creature, longer, stranger, more serpentine. A body like a snake, a head small and sharp, ribs rippling like waves frozen in stone. The plesiosaur. When news of this fossil reached London, it caused outrage. Some scientists refused to believe it was real. They accused Mary of assembling it from multiple animals. A hoax, they said. A fabrication by a poor girl who didn't know better. One famous anatomist studied the bones in silence. Then, reluctantly, he admitted the truth. The creature was real. And the world shifted again. These fossils did not fit into old stories. They suggested deep time ages upon ages before humanity. Oceans where fields now stood. Creatures born, ruling, and vanishing long before humans ever drew breath. Mary Anning had no voice in these debates. She was not invited into lecture halls. She was not allowed into scientific societies. She stood outside, literally and figuratively, while men argued over the meaning of what she had found. Yet without her, there would be nothing to argue about. She continued to walk the cliffs, eyes scanning the ground, reading the land like a language written in stone. She learned to recognize patterns, to anticipate where bones would fall. Her knowledge surpassed that of many trained scholars. But knowledge did not bring comfort. Money was always uncertain. Recognition even more so. And with every discovery, the cliffs grew more dangerous, as if guarding their remaining secrets. One afternoon, Mary watched as a close companion was killed by a sudden collapse. The earth she trusted turned violent without warning. She survived, but the message was clear. The cliffs were not finished. And neither were the creatures buried within them. Because deeper in the rock, something even stranger waited, something that would challenge not just science, but humanity's place in the story of life itself. And Mary Anning was walking straight toward it. Imagine standing in a crowded room where everyone is speaking about your work. Your discoveries, your ideas, your proof. And yet, no one speaks to you. You are invisible, even as the world turns because of what you found. This was Mary Anning's life. By the early 1820s, the cliffs of Lyme Regis had begun to change science itself. Ancient sea monsters were no longer rumors whispered by collectors. They were real. They had bones. They had shape. They had history. And almost all of them came from one woman. Mary Anning. But outside the narrow streets of her seaside town, her name barely traveled. The fossils did. Mary remained behind. Scholars arrived from London, Oxford, Edinburgh. They came with notebooks, polished shoes, and confidence shaped by privilege. They bent over Mary's specimens with awe, measuring jaws and counting vertebrae. They debated timelines and theories late into the night. Then they returned home. Their papers were published. Their reputations grew. Mary's role faded into footnotes or vanished entirely. Few people know how deeply this silence cut her. Mary was not ignorant. She read everything she could find. Scientific papers. Sketches. Letters. She taught herself anatomy, learning how bones fit together, how life moved through structure. She could identify fragments that baffled trained men. Yet she was barred from scientific societies. She could not attend meetings. She could not present her findings. She was a woman. She was poor. She was a dissenter outside the Church of England, in a society where religion shaped trust and authority. These barriers were walls, and Mary lived on the wrong side of all of them. Imagine discovering creatures that rewrote Earth's history. And still being treated as a shopkeeper selling curios. This was Mary's reality. Money remained uncertain. Fossils did not sell consistently. Storms were unpredictable. Some seasons brought nothing. Others brought danger. Still, she returned to the cliffs. Because the cliffs were honest. They did not care who she was. They only demanded courage. The work was brutal. She climbed unstable slopes alone. She balanced on narrow ledges while waves slammed below. The ground could collapse without warning, burying years of labor or a human life in seconds. Each fossil was a race against time. Once exposed, bones could be destroyed by weather or stolen by rival collectors. Mary worked quickly, carefully, knowing the Earth could reclaim its secrets at any moment. And yet, with every discovery, the distance between her and recognition remained. One fossil in particular stirred both excitement and doubt, a creature so strange that many refused to believe it could exist. The plesiosaur, with its long neck and alien proportions, seemed too impossible for the world people thought they knew. Some claimed it must be fake. That Mary had assembled it incorrectly. That she had been deceived, or worse, was deceiving others. The accusation stung deeply. Mary had spent countless hours extracting those bones with her own hands. She had watched them emerge piece by piece, perfectly connected, exactly as the creature had died millions of years before. She knew it was real. But knowing was not enough. Eventually, respected anatomists confirmed her work. Publicly. Reluctantly. The fossil was genuine. The apology, if it existed at all, was quiet. Mary received no medals. No titles. No steady income from the institutions that benefited from her discoveries. She sold fossils to survive while others built careers upon them. Still, she kept going. There was something relentless in her, a sense that the Earth had chosen her, and she could not turn away. She felt a responsibility not just to collect, but to understand. To preserve. To tell the story locked inside stone. Sometimes, she walked the cliffs alone in silence, scanning the ground as if listening for a voice only she could hear. Sometimes, she wondered whether it mattered. Whether anyone would ever truly see her. Yet the fossils kept coming. Fragments of creatures unknown. Shapes that suggested worlds before worlds. Each one whispered the same truth: the past was far larger, far stranger, than anyone had imagined. And Mary Anning stood at the edge of that revelation. Acknowledged by the Earth. But ignored by society. Still, the cliffs had not finished with her. Because buried deeper than bones and monsters was something else entirely. A discovery that would force the world to confront not just extinct creatures, but extinction itself. And when that moment arrived, silence would no longer be possible. The lecture hall was warm, lit by gaslight and certainty. Men sat in neat rows, their coats brushed clean, their boots untouched by mud or sea spray. At the front of the room, a skeleton was displayed, long, ancient, magnificent. A sea dragon pulled from the depths of time. Applause followed the lecture. Mary Anning was not there. Imagine that moment. Your discovery standing in the spotlight. Your life's work explained in confident voices. And your name never spoken. This is how science advanced in the early 19th century. Quietly, respectfully, and often at someone else's expense. By now, Mary's fossils were famous. Ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs appeared in journals, books, and museum halls. Engravings circulated across Europe. Artists painted dramatic scenes of ancient oceans filled with monsters inspired by specimens taken from Lyme Regis. These images shaped how the public imagined prehistory. Few realized that nearly all of it began with a poor woman walking dangerous cliffs. Mary continued to sell her fossils, piece by piece. She needed the money. There was no salary for discovery. No institutional support. When museums bought her finds, they paid for the object, not the mind behind it. the ideas belonged to others. Scientists debated extinction, deep time, and ancient worlds while Mary chipped away at rock, exposed to wind and falling stone. She provided the evidence. They provided the language. And the world listened to them. Social barriers hardened with every success that was not hers. She could not join scientific societies. She could not attend meetings where her fossils were discussed. Her gender closed doors. Her class sealed them shut. Her religious beliefs marked her as an outsider in a rigid Anglican world. Even when scholars relied on her expertise, they often framed it carefully. Collected by Miss Anning. Obtained from Lyme Regis. Rarely discovered by. Rarely understood by. Imagine standing on a cliff as the tide rises below, knowing that the specimen you are extracting will soon be labeled with another man's name. Mary did not protest loudly. She had been taught, like many women of her time, to endure. To work. To survive. But the silence weighed on her. Money problems returned again and again. Fossil hunting depended on storms, and storms did not care about rent. Some years were good. Others were desperate. Mary lived modestly, often anxiously, knowing that one bad season could mean ruin. The danger never lessened. Cliffs collapsed without warning. Friends died. Tools broke. Waves surged unexpectedly. Mary herself narrowly escaped death more than once, her knowledge of the land the only thing that saved her. Yet still, she found things no one else could. Fragments that suggested creatures unlike any seen before. Fossils that raised new questions instead of providing easy answers. Each discovery chipped away at the old belief that the world had always been as it was. The idea of extinction, true extinction, began to take hold. Not animals lost in a flood. Not creatures hiding in unexplored lands. Gone forever. This was a terrifying thought for many. If species could vanish, what did that say about creation? About permanence? About humanity's place in time? Mary's fossils forced these questions into the open. And still, her name remained mostly absent from the conversation. Some scientists knew the truth. A few acknowledged her skill in private letters. Others quietly relied on her judgment when identifying specimens. They trusted her eye, even if they would not publicly elevate her status. It was a strange contradiction. Mary was essential. Mary was invisible. Few people know how close she came to being lost entirely, not to the cliffs, but to history. Had she been born into wealth, her name might sit beside the founders of paleontology. Had she been a man, she would have lectured across Europe. Had she belonged to the right church, the right class, the right world, recognition might have followed naturally. Instead, she remained on the margins, watching science grow from seeds she planted but would never harvest. And yet, something was changing. The weight of evidence was becoming too great to ignore. The creatures she uncovered were too important. The patterns too clear. Slowly, reluctantly, her expertise began to be acknowledged, not with applause, but with dependence. They needed her. And Mary knew it. Because buried beneath the cliffs of Lyme Regis was more than fossilized bone. There was proof, silent, unyielding, that the story of life was far older and far more complex than anyone had dared to imagine. And Mary Anning was about to uncover one final truth. Not just about ancient worlds, but about her own place within them. The storm came without warning. Waves slammed against the black cliffs of Lyme Regis, and the wind screamed like something alive. Imagine standing there alone, your boots sinking into wet sand, knowing that every step could mean death. Most people ran from the cliffs when storms came. Mary Anning walked toward them. Because storms revealed secrets. When the rain tore pieces from the cliffs, the past spilled out. Bones. Shapes. Shadows of creatures no human had ever seen alive. And Mary, still poor, still overlooked, still fighting the world, was there to meet them. She had learned danger early. Her father had died after a fall from these same cliffs, leaving Mary, her mother, and her brother with nothing but debt and grief. Fossil hunting was not curiosity for her. It was survival. Each day, she scanned the rocks with trained eyes, searching for patterns others missed. A curve that didn't belong. A shadow that suggested a spine. A tooth sharp enough to whisper violence. The sea did not care that she was a woman. The cliffs did not care that she was poor. One slip could send her into the water below. And once, they nearly did. Mary was buried alive in a landslide, rescued only because a friend died pulling her free. She walked away shaken, but she returned to the cliffs again. Because something out there was waiting. And she found it. Not once. Again and again. Skeletons unlike anything known. Creatures with long jaws and enormous eyes. Reptiles that swam like fish. Beasts that ruled ancient oceans. They would later be called ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, flying dragons of stone. But Mary did not have those words. Few people know how lonely discovery can be when no one believes you belong in the room. Mary sold her fossils to wealthy collectors and scientists, men with education, titles, and respect. They invited her discoveries into lecture halls, museums, and books. They did not invite her. Her name was rarely printed. Her voice was rarely quoted. When theories were formed, they were discussed over dinner tables she would never sit at. She was working class. She was a woman. She was a dissenter in a deeply religious England that distrusted her faith. Yet the evidence could not be ignored. Her fossils forced science to confront an unthinkable idea: extinction. Until then, many believed God would never allow his creations to vanish. Mary's fossils told a different story. Whole worlds had lived. And died. Long before humans ever existed. That idea shook faith, philosophy, and history itself. And it came from a woman selling stones to survive. Mary read everything she could get her hands on. She taught herself anatomy so she could understand what she found. She corrected scholars, politely, precisely, when they misunderstood her discoveries. Some listened. Many did not. Still, they kept coming back to her. Because she was always right. Imagine knowing the truth while the world debates it without you. Mary lived simply. She never married. She never escaped poverty for long. Fame brushed past her but never stayed. When money came, it went quickly: medical bills, family needs, survival. But beneath the quiet life was a mind reshaping humanity's understanding of time. She showed that the earth was older than anyone dared imagine. That monsters once ruled the seas. That history was written in stone, waiting for someone brave enough to read it. Children watched her work from the shore. Visitors whispered about the strange woman with the hammer. Scientists borrowed her findings and her knowledge while guarding their status. She did not rage. She did not protest loudly. She endured. In her later years, illness slowed her steps. The cliffs she once raced across became distant silhouettes. But by then, her influence had already spread beyond her lifetime. When she died, some of the very institutions that had ignored her finally spoke her name aloud. A little too late. A little too quietly. Yet her discoveries remained. Every museum fossil. Every textbook illustration of ancient reptiles. Every child staring in wonder at the skeleton of a creature older than memory. They all trace back to Mary Anning. A woman who stood against storms. Against silence. Against history itself. But there was something else Mary left behind. A question. If the earth had hidden so many worlds before us, what else had been lost to time, waiting to be uncovered? The cliffs still stand. The sea still erodes. And the past is far from finished speaking. The storm has passed, but the cliff still breathes. Imagine standing on the edge of Lyme Regis after a night of thunder. The air smells of salt and broken stone. Below, the sea pulls back like a curtain, revealing bones that have not seen daylight for millions of years. Somewhere among them is a woman with a hammer in her hand, her skirt heavy with mud, her eyes fixed on the rock face. She does not know it yet, but the world will never look the same again. Mary Anning's greatest discoveries were already behind her. The ichthyosaurs. The plesiosaurs. Creatures so strange that even learned men struggled to name them. But legacy is not built in moments of triumph alone. It is forged in what follows, when the noise fades, the crowds leave, and the struggle continues. Mary remained poor. Despite changing science forever, she lived most of her life one storm away from ruin. Fossil hunting was dangerous work. One wrong step on the cliffs could mean death. She had already lost her beloved dog to a landslide. She herself narrowly escaped the same fate. Each trip to the cliffs was a gamble, but she had no choice. Fossils were not passion alone, they were survival. And still, she was not welcome in the world she helped create. She was a woman in a man's science. Working class in a world ruled by gentlemen. A dissenter in a country shaped by the Church of England. She could not attend university. She could not join scientific societies. She could not even sign her own papers. Her discoveries traveled the world, but her name often did not. Few people know how often others took credit for her work. Mary sold fossils to wealthy collectors and scholars. They displayed them. They wrote about them. They debated their meaning in grand halls she would never enter. Sometimes, she was mentioned in passing. Often, she was not mentioned at all. And yet, the experts kept coming back to her. Because Mary knew the cliffs like no one else. She could read stone the way others read books. She knew where to dig, when to wait, when the sea would give something back. She noticed patterns others missed. She understood anatomy without formal training, correcting scholars twice her social standing. When a fossil arrived in London, chances were it had passed through her hands first. Slowly, quietly, respect began to grow. A few men spoke her name aloud in meetings. A few papers acknowledged her skill. Toward the end of her life, even institutions that once ignored her offered small support. It was not justice. But it was something. Mary never married. She never escaped the cliffs. Her health declined, weakened by years of cold winds and hard labor. When she died in 1847, she was just 47 years old. There were no grand ceremonies. No statues. No titles. But something else was happening. The idea that dragons were myths was fading. The idea that the earth was young was cracking. The creatures Mary pulled from stone forced humanity to confront deep time, a past so vast it shattered old beliefs. These fossils were not curiosities. They were evidence. And evidence changes everything. Long after her death, science found its name for what she helped begin. Paleontology. A field built on bones, patience, and courage. A field born not in lecture halls, but on dangerous cliffs, shaped by a woman who refused to look away from the truth in the stone. Today, children learn about prehistoric life without knowing her story. Museums display ancient skeletons without telling where they came from. But beneath every mounted fossil, there is a shadow. A hammer striking rock. A woman watching the tide. Mary Anning did not just find fossils. She changed how humans understood their place in time. She showed that the earth had stories older than scripture, deeper than memory. And she proved that knowledge does not belong only to the wealthy or the powerful, but to those willing to risk everything to uncover it. The cliffs of Lyme Regis are quieter now. But they still erode. They still fall. And they still reveal secrets. Somewhere, another bone waits in the stone. And with it, another question, one that Mary Anning asked without fear, long before the world was ready to hear the answer. What else lies beneath our feet, waiting for someone brave enough to look? The story does not end here.